And you are
Hi.
live.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Colleen. Hi, everybody. It's good to be here. I'm live right now with you. It's July 22nd. I can't believe it already. 2016. I'm not sure if that's true or not.
July 22nd?
Oh, I don't know. Actually, where am I? What is the date?
It's the 8th.
Oh my gosh, no wonder. I'm dizzy today. It's July 8th. Don't listen to me. I'm always telling people, don't pay attention to me. I know nothing.
All right. What already? So
Yeah, thanks for keeping me on track, Colleen. Talk about staying up late at night, right? And not being present. Well, I'm still glad to be here. Anyway, I've been wrestling black snakes today, trying to keep them away from the baby chicks. That's quite an adventure. Okay, so yeah, here I am up here in the Hudson Valley on Turtle Island, not far from the great river, the Mahicanituck, the river that flows both ways. It's actually the Hudson River, and you know who that was. Henry there, who is said to have discovered this land. Yeah. So, I'm going to take a little diversion today from the alien mind that I've been really into very deeply, and all the ET's perspectives of what's going on here on Earth, and the Verdants who are trying to colonize the Earth and already making inroads into some of the elite, you know, all of that. Because I found something that I thought was really intriguing. And so I like to bring intriguing things, unusual things here with Beyond Reality. And this is about 5,000-year-old Egyptian hieroglyphs found in New South Wales. So, this is by Paul White. And he writes, there are about 250 stone carvings that have been part of the local folklore of this area for nearly a century, with reports of people who cited them as far back as the early 1900s. The site was secretly visited by families in the know, in quotes, whoever that is, in the 1950s, and fell back into local mythology for a couple of decades until it was accidentally rediscovered by a man looking for his lost dog. The carvings are in a rock cleft, a large block of split sandstone on a cliff face that has created a small chasm or a chamber of two flat stone walls facing each other that widens out from 2 to 4 meters and is covered in by a huge flat rock as a roof at the narrow end. The cleft itself is most cave-like and only accessible by a small rock chute from above or below, and that is well disguised from the average bushwalker or dog walker, I guess you could say. When you first come up the rock chute and climb into the stone hallway, you are immediately confronted by a number of worn carvings that are obviously ancient Egyptian symbols. These are certainly not your average Aboriginal animal carvings, but something clearly alien in the Australian bush. At the end of the chamber, protected by the remaining section of stone roof, is a remarkable third life-size carving of the ancient Egyptian god Anubis, who is the judge of the dead. Egyptologist Ray Johnson, who had translated extremely ancient texts for the Museum of Antiquities in Cairo, eventually was successful in documenting and translating the two facing walls of Egyptian characters which stemmed from the Third Dynasty in New South Wales. They allegedly chronicle a tragic saga of ancient explorers who got shipwrecked in a strange and hostile land, and the untimely death of their royal leader, Lord Djezeb. A group of 3 cartouches, these are called frame clusters of glyphs, record the name of Ra-Jadef, as reigning king of the Upper and Lower Nile and son of Khufu, who in turn is son of the king Sneferu. These dates the expedition just after the reign of King Khufu, Cheops, alleged builder of the Great Pyramids. Lord Djebel may have actually been one of the sons of the pharaoh Ra-Djebel, who reigned with Khufu. The hieroglyphic text was apparently written under the instruction of a ship's captain, or similar, with the corner glyph on the wall displaying the title of a high official or chief priest. The scribe is speaking for His Highness the Prince, and from this wretched place where we were carried by ship, wretched meaning in the outback somewhere. Maybe it was a spaceship. The expedition's leader is described in the inscriptions as the king's son, Lord Djebel, who came to grief a long way from home. The hieroglyphs sketch his journey and his tragic demise. Burial rituals, prayers, and preparations are described below. And these are the words that are written. For 2 seasons he made my way westward, weary but strong to the end, always praying, always joyful and smiting insects. He, the servant of God, said God brought the insects, have gone around hills and deserts and wind and rain with no lakes at hand. He was killed while carrying the golden falcon standard up front in a foreign land, crossing mountains, desert, and water along the way. He who died before is here laid to rest. May he have life everlasting. He is never again to stand beside the waters of the sacred Mer, meaning Mer means love. There was a moat around the pyramid called the Waters of Mer. The second facing wall, which was much more seriously eroded, details the tragedy even further. This wall begins with the badly eroded glyph of a snake, heft, with a glyph of jaws and the symbol for twice. In other words, the snake bit twice. Those followers of the diving Lord Khufu, mighty one of Lower Egypt, Lord of the 2 adzes, not all shall return. We must go forward and not look back. All the creek and river beds are dry. Our boat is damaged and tied up with a rope. Death was caused by snake. We gave egg yolk from the medicine chest and prayed to Amen, the hidden one, for he was struck twice. We walled in the side entrance to this chamber with stones from all around. We aligned the chamber with the western heavens. The 3 doors of eternity were connected to the rear end of the royal tomb and sealed in. We placed beside it a vessel, the holy offering, should he awaken from the tomb. Separated from home is the royal body and all others. Here is inscribed the extraordinary story of the death and burial of Lord Djebel, one of the sons of the pharaoh Ra-Djebel. Then there's the Gympie Pyramid, is a terrace structure located in the outskirts of Gympie, Queensland in Australia. It has been proven to be an Italian farmer's construction to stop erosion. It is subject to amateur speculation, which has been argued to be hagiography by serious scholars, especially suggestions that it was constructed by an unknown ancient civilization, Egyptians, South Americans, or even the Chinese. But Rex Gilroy claims that he discovered the Gympie Pyramid in 1975 and that the pyramid was created by Egyptians who had mining operations in Australia centuries ago, with bases of operation reaching as far as the Blue Mountains in New South Wales. This is doubtful, it says here. In an article, Anthony G. Wheeler writes, it seems that a terraced hill was claimed to be a pyramid on the basis of a nearby stone wall around a church being of unusual construction, and supposed local legends and taboos that warned against intrusion into the pyramid area. The predominance in the area of a cactus of South or Central American origin and a statue of non-Aboriginal manufacture found nearby. and some crude inscriptions on a stone block dug up in the area. Wheeler notes that an amateur archaeologist, Marilyn N. Pye, became convinced that the pyramid and other features were evidence of ancient settlement in Australia by the Incas of South America. While Pye argues the pyramid is of Incan origin, Gavin Menzies states that it is direct and persuasive evidence of the Chinese visits to Australia, and that its size, height, and shape are typical of Ming Dynasty observation platforms, and it would have been wholly logical for the Chinese to build observatories to determine precisely the location of the phenomenon riches that they had discovered. And Wheeler argues that the claims of an extraordinary origin for the pyramid are unfounded. He writes, "The facts are probably that the Gympie Golden Pyramid is actually an ordinary hill terraced by early Italian immigrants for viticulture that has been disfigured by erosion and the removal of stone from the retaining walls for use elsewhere. As for all the supporting statements by the various authorities, all but a few unimportant ones fade away as one after another proves to be a misquote, a falsification, or an outright fabrication." Now, currently, the Queensland Department of Main Roads is planning to build a road through that site, and the Gympie Pyramid has been researched independently and found to be far more banal. It was part of a retaining wall built by an Italian farmer, it says, to stop erosion on a natural mesa of his property. Significant work on the origin was undertaken by a Gympie historian, Dr. Elaine Brown, during the 1990s and early 2000s, in which she found that the terrace structure was constructed by a Swiss horticulturist in the late 1880s. So you have all this confusing information about things, right? So I always say, just listen, observe, feel, and take what sings to your heart spirit. Here's another one for you. This is a lost cave city in the Grand Canyon. Oh, by the way, Susie Mazzoli, who I had as a guest on my talk show just recently, did an interview with an Australian elder who talked about the ancient Stonehenge, similar to Stonehenge, but he said more grand, huge mounds and a Stonehenge-like place in the outback that they found. And he also notes that they have Egyptian hieroglyphs on them. And he was talking about how their people, the old ones, knew all about this. So in my reading, what I just read to you about the controversy of is this real or factual or false or what is it? So apparently the elders in Australia know something about this, and they believe that it's very true. So that's just one part of this mysterious story. So back to the lost cave city in the Grand Canyon. Did an ancient civilization live in caves below the Grand Canyon? This is as vague a statement as wondering why some of the ancient Mesoamerican people depicted their gods as white men or the Olmec gods looked African. Stretching the imagination, perhaps whatever was found in the Grand Canyon caves discussed below is linked to ancient alien theory. It is interesting to speculate on ancient Egyptians or Tibetans flying to the Grand Canyon in vimanas. Of course, those are flying ships. But to date, there is no tangible proof to support this claim. Well, how can there be? Because they're still debunking UFOs. But I did say that I think the Egyptians probably flew out there to Australia. That's just me. And in the Olmec figures found in Mexico, they do look African. I've seen them. And they also found strange artifacts there, like elephant figures, figures of giraffes, and those really are not in Mexico. And depicted also Mesoamerican people did depict their gods as white men because Viracocha was a white man with long hair and blue eyes. Now, long blonde hair, by the way. Now, some of this information makes me think about the tall, white, blonde ETs with blue eyes. I'm just throwing that in there just to bring more interest and I hope not confusion, but just making us think a bit. Perhaps the most amazing suppression of all is the excavation of an Egyptian tomb by the Smithsonian itself in Arizona. There they go again. A lengthy front-page story of the Phoenix Gazette on April 5th, 1909, gave a highly detailed report of the discovery and excavation of a rock-cut vault by an expedition led by a Professor S.A. Jordan of the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian, however, claims to have absolutely no knowledge of the discovery or its discoveries. And yes, here's the front page of the Phoenix Gazette of April 5th, 1909. I'm looking right at it. And also we know, with some research, that the Smithsonian had certainly confiscated all of the giant skeletons that have been found dug up and discovered. And they have no knowledge of these skeletons. There are front page articles and many news articles with photographs and so on, and many reports. But the Smithsonian appeared and scarfed everything up, and now who knows where all that information is. It's sort of, let's keep the truth hidden. The World Explorers Club decided to check on this story by calling the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., though we felt there was little chance of getting any real information, and after speaking briefly to an operator, we were transferred to a Smithsonian staff archaeologist, and a woman's voice came on the phone and identified herself. I told her that I was investigating a story from a 1909 Phoenix newspaper article about the Smithsonian institutions having excavated rock-cut vaults in the Grand Canyon where Egyptian artifacts had been discovered, and whether the Smithsonian Institute could give me any more information on this subject. She said, "The first thing I can tell you, before we go any further, is that no Egyptian artifacts of any kind have ever been found in North or South America. Therefore, I can tell you that the Smithsonian Institute has never been involved in any such excavations." She was quite helpful and polite, but in the end knew nothing. Neither she nor anyone else with whom I spoke could find any record of the discovery or either G.E. Kincaid and Professor S.A. Jordan. While it cannot be discounted that the entire story is an elaborate newspaper hoax, the fact that it was on the front page, named the prestigious Smithsonian Institution, and also gave a highly detailed story that went on for several pages, it kind of lends a great deal to its credibility. It is hard to believe such a story could have come out of thin air. If this story is true, it would radically change the current view that there was no transoceanic contact in pre-Columbian times, and that all American Indians on both continents are descended from Ice Age explorers who came from the Bering Strait. Is the idea that ancient Egyptians can't come to the Arizona area in the ancient past so objectionable and preposterous that it must be covered up? Perhaps the Smithsonian Institution is more interested in maintaining the status quo than rocking the boat with astonishing new discoveries that overturn previously accepted academic teachings. And historian and linguist Carl Hart, editor of Word Explorer, then obtained a hiker's map of the Grand Canyon from a bookstore in Chicago. Poring over the map, we were amazed to see that much of the area on the north side of the canyon has Egyptian names. The area around 94 Mile Creek and Trinity Creek had areas, rock formations apparently, which names like Tower of Set, Tower of Ra, Horus Tower, Osiris Temple, and Isis Temple. Very interesting. In the Haunted Canyon area were such names as Cheops Pyramid, the Buddha Cluster, Buddha Temple, Manu Temple, and Shiva Temple. Was there any relationship between these places and the alleged Egyptian discoveries in the Grand Canyon? We called a state archaeologist at the Grand Canyon, and we were told that the early explorers had just liked Egyptian and Hindu names, that was all, but that it was true that this area was off limits to hikers and all other visitors because of dangerous caves. Indeed, this entire area with the Egyptian and Hindu place names in the Grand Canyon is a forbidden zone. No one is allowed into this large area. We could only conclude that this was the area where the vaults were located. Yet today, this area is curiously off limits to all hikers, and even in large part to park personnel. I believe that the discerning reader will see that if only a small part of the Smithsonian, they're calling it the Smithsonian Gate, evidence is true, then our most hallowed archaeological institution has been actively involved in suppressing evidence for advanced American cultures and evidence for ancient voyages of various cultures to North America and evidence for animalistic giants and other oddball artifacts and evidence that tends to disprove the official dogma that is now the history of North America. The Smithsonian's Board of Regents still refuses to open its meetings to the news media or the public. If Americans were ever allowed inside the nation's attic, as the Smithsonian has been called, what skeletons might they find? It also reminds me of the Vatican's attic with what skeletons, more than skeletons, might we find? And this is a report by G.E. Kincaid. G.E. Kincaid believed himself to be the first white person born in Idaho. He was an explorer and a hunter all of his life. He worked 30 years for the Smithsonian Institute, and below are excerpts from his journal for his alleged adventures in the cave. I was journeying down the Colorado River in a boat, alone, looking for minerals. Some 42 miles up the river from the E.I. Tovar Crystal Canyon, I noticed on the east wall stains in the sedimentary formation about 2,000 feet above the river bed. There was no trail to this point, but I finally reached it with great difficulty. I'm looking at this photograph, and it's extraordinary. It's a cave entrance to the mysterious underground citadel, and it's a straight, sheer rock face above the river, and it's an opening, square opening, except at the top, it's like a pointed, it continues up to a point, like a pyramidal opening rather than just a square box. The entrance is 1,486 feet down the sheer canyon wall. Above a shelf which hid it from view from the river was the mouth of the cave. There are steps leading from this entrance some 30 yards to what was at that time the level of the river. When I saw the chisel marks on the wall inside the entrance, I became very interested, and securing my gun, I went in. I gathered a number of relics which I carried down the Colorado to Yuma, from whence I shipped them to Washington with details of the discovery, and following this, other explorations were undertaken. So interested have the scientists become that preparations are being made to equip our camp for extensive studies, the number of archaeologists increasing to from 30 to 40. There's a diagram here of the underground cave, tunnels and rooms. It shows some artifact locations that he made a drawing of. It's quite extensive and extraordinary, and I'll read the description to you. From the long main passage, another mammoth chamber has been discovered from which radiate scores of passageways like the spokes of a wheel. So as I'm looking at it, there's a very long chamber, like a tunnel, a hallway opening into a large round cavern. And from that there are rays, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 rays of other tunnels like the sun's rays. From that main chamber, radiating out, like he says, like the spokes of a wheel. Several hundred rooms have been discovered, reached by passageway running from the main passage, and one of them having been explored for 854 feet and another 634 feet. Now, we're talking the Grand Canyon here, okay? The recent finds include articles which have never been known as native to this country, and doubtless they had their origin in the Orient. War weapons, copper instruments, sharp-edged and hard as steel, indicate the high state of a civilization reached by these people. The main passageway is about 12 feet wide, narrowing to 9 feet toward the farther end. About 57 feet from the entrance, the first side passage branch off to the right and to the left, completely opposite each other, along which on both sides are a number of rooms about the size of ordinary living rooms of today, though some are 30 by 40 feet square. These are entered by oval-shaped doors and are ventilated by round air spaces through the walls into the passages. The walls are about 3 feet 6 inches in thickness. The passages are chiseled or hewn as straight as could be laid out by an engineer. The ceilings of many of the rooms converge to a center. The side passages near the entrance run to a sharp angle from the main hall, but toward the rear they gradually reach a right angle in direction. Over 100 feet from the entrance is the cross hall, several hundred feet long, in which are found the idol or image of the people's god, sitting cross-legged with a lotus flower or lily in each hand. Now, again, I'm reminding you, this is underneath in the Grand Canyon, and so pay attention. It's the people's god who created this cavern, sitting cross-legged with a lotus flower or lily in each hand. The cast of the face is oriental. I'm looking at it. It's quite extraordinary. The idol almost resembles Buddha, though the scientists are not certain as to what religious worship it represents. And taking into consideration everything found thus far, it is possible that this worship most resembles the ancient people of Tibet. Surrounding this idol are smaller images, some very beautiful in form, others crooked-necked and distorted shapes that are symbolical, probably of good and evil. There are 2 large cactus with protruding arms, one on each side of the dais on which the god squats. All this is carved out of hard rock resembling marble. In the opposite corner of this cross hall were found tools of all descriptions made of copper. These people undoubtedly knew the lost art of hardening this metal, which has been sought by chemicals for centuries without result. Now, the copper piece here, and I do remember reading about early native people up north, way up north actually, burial sites there where they found native people with copper implements on them, and they couldn't figure out how they got this copper. Where would they get this copper? On a bench running around the workroom was some charcoal and other material probably used in the process. There is also slag and stuff similar to mat, showing that these ancients smelted ore, but so far no trace of where or how this was done has been discovered, nor the origin of the ore. Among the other findings are vases or urns and cups of copper and gold, very artistic in design. The pottery work includes enameled ware and glazed vessels. Another passageway leads to granaries, such as are found in the Oriental temples. They contain seeds of various kinds. One very large storehouse has not yet been entered, as it is 12 feet high and can be reached only from above. 2 copper hooks extend on the edge, which indicates that some sort of ladder was attached. These granaries are rounded, as the materials of which they are constructed, I think, is a very hard cement. A gray metal is also found in this cavern, which puzzles the scientists, for its identity has not been established. It resembles platinum strewn promiscuously over the floor everywhere, or what people are calling cat's eyes, a yellow stone of no great value. Each one is engraved with the head of the Malay type. Carved on all the urns, over doorways and tablets of stone are mysterious hieroglyphs, the key to which the Smithsonian Institute hopes to discover. The engravings on the tablets probably has something to do with the religion of the people. Similar hieroglyphs have been found in southern Arizona. Among the pictorial writings, only 2 animals are found, one of them looking prehistoric. The tomb or crypt in which the mummies were found is one of the largest of the chambers, the walls slanting back at an angle of about 35 degrees. On these are tiers of mummies, each one occupying a separate hewn shelf. At the head of each is a small bench on which is found copper cups and the pieces of broken swords. Some of the mummies are covered with clay and are all wrapped in a bark fabric. Does this seem real to you? This is pretty fantastic, wild out there in our canyon out there, right? The Grand Canyon. Let me see. These urns or cups on the lower tiers are crude, while as the higher shelves are reached, the urns are finer in design, showing a later stage of civilization. It is worthy of note that all the mummies examined so far have proved to be male. There are no children or females being buried here, and this leads to the belief that this exterior section was the warriors' barracks. Interesting. Among the discoveries, no bones of animals have been found, no skins, no clothing, no bedding, and many of the rooms are bare but for water vessels. And one room, about 40 by 700 feet, was probably the main dining hall for cooking utensils, are found here. What these people lived on is a problem, though it is presumed that they came south in the winter and farmed in the valleys, going back north in the summer. All right, listen to this. Upwards of 50,000 people could have lived in the caverns comfortably. One theory is that the present Indian tribes found in Arizona are descendants of the serfs or slaves of the people who inhabited the cave. And I think that I know for sure, I'm going to step into that. I know for sure that the Indian people, the First Nations people, tribes in Arizona, are not descendants, I think they would argue that, of the serfs and slaves of people who inhabited the caves. Undoubtedly, a good many thousands of years before the Christian era, there was a people that lived here which reached a high stage of civilization. The chronology of human history is full of gaps. Do you think? One thing I have not spoken of, but may be of interest to you, there is one chamber of the passageway which is not ventilated, and when we approached it, a deadly, snaky smell struck us. Our light would not penetrate the room, and until stronger ones are available, we will not know what the chamber contains. Some say snakes, but others think it may contain a deadly gas or chemicals used by the ancients. There are no sounds that are heard here, but it smells snaky just the same. What does that mean? Snaky. The whole underground installation gives one of shaky nerves the creeps. This is a scientist talking to you. The gloomy feeling is like a weight on one's shoulders, and our flashlights and candles only make the darkness blacker. Imagination can revel in conjectures and ungodly daydreams back through the ages that have elapsed till the mind reels dizzily in space. In connection with this story, it is notable that among the Hopi Indians the tradition is told that their ancestors once lived in an underworld in the Grand Canyon till dissension arose between the good and the bad, the people of one heart and the people of two hearts. Macheto, who was their chief, counseled them to leave the underworld, but there was no way out. And I must say that many indigenous people speak of their origins as underground first. The chief then caused a tree to grow up and pierce the roof of the underworld, and then the people of one heart climbed out. They tarried by the Red River, which is the Colorado, and they grew grain, and they grew corn. They sent out a message to the Temple of the Sun, asking the blessings of peace, goodwill, and rain for people of one heart. That messenger never returned. But today, at the Hopi villages at sundown, can be seen the old men of the tribe out on the housetops gazing toward the sun, looking for their messenger. When he does return, their lands and ancient dwelling place will be restored to them. This is the tradition, or the prophecy, let's say. Among the engravings, the animals in the cave is seen the image of a heart over the spot where it is located. The legend was learned by W.E. Rollins, the artist, during a year spent with the Hopi Indians. There are two theories of the origin of the Egyptians. One is that they came from Asia, another that the racial cradle was in the Upper Nile region. Haren, an Egyptologist, believed in the Indian origin of the Egyptians. The discoveries in the Grand Canyon may throw further light on human evolution and prehistoric ages. Now, if you have any pertinent information regarding this cave, they want you to get in touch with them. I guess they're questioning this mythical civilization. So, I'm going to look at this mythical civilizations here and see there are some very interesting myths. And I always say myths are real facts. They're factual, but the scientific mind and the elite can't allow these truths to be known. So therefore everything is a myth. Let's see what we have. We have ancient submerged cities, amazing, covering more than 71% of the planet. The Earth's oceans are a vast and mostly unexplored mystery. For most of recorded history, man could only guess what lay beneath the ocean's surface. But new technologies are reaching new depths, and researchers around the world are finding the unexpected. Underwater complexes and sophisticated monuments that defy the conventional historic record. There are remains of Earth civilizations that were once exposed on land and then later submerged under the sea due to the climatic changes over 10,000 years ago. This implies that life on Earth, other advanced civilizations, did exist. They were lost to ice ages of the past that created great floods that destroyed them, which may be the fate of our planet in the future, some think. There's the 9,300-year-old pillar found on the Mediterranean seafloor. There's the Bimini Road in the Atlantic Ocean, Of course, we know the Bermuda Triangle in the Atlantic Ocean, and there's the Centre Gwaelod in Wales and the Gulf of Cambodge in Dwarf off India. All of these are cities underwater. And the ruins off Bolivia and Lake Titicaca underneath there. Mysterious monuments found beneath the Sea of Galilee. And in the Persian Gulf, undersea world in the North Sea, Yonaguni ruins off Japan. There's like so much that we don't know. 9,300-year-old pillar is found on the Mediterranean sea floor. So, at least, Stone Age hunter-gatherers in a now submerged area of the Mediterranean Sea accompanied a feat beyond what today's experts thought possible for that time. It's always that way, isn't it? These are Stone Age hunter-gatherers or primitive people, and suddenly now the experts can't understand how they could they can't imagine or understand how they could accomplish something. They cut a 15-ton limestone pillar with precision. They drilled holes in it and transported it nearly 984 feet, which is 300 meters. The monolith is 39 feet, 12 meters long. Oceanographers studying the Mediterranean sea floor in the Sicilian Channel between Tunisia and Sicily in 2012 found the monolith 131 feet, 40 meters deep. In a new paper in the Journal of Archaeological Science, the researchers say this area became completely submerged about 9,300 years ago. Give or take a couple hundred years. Before that, the area was shallow sea, with an archipelago of several islands about halfway between the island of Sicily and the North African coast. So, it is assumed the pillar was carved at least 9,300 years ago. Who were these people? Researchers were able to date the stone of the monolith by extracting shell fragments from it. They found it has the same composition and age as limestone about 330 yards away, suggesting it was transported that distance. The researchers say the discovery of this submerged pillar may require scholars to rethink the idea of technological primitivism among hunter-gatherers. Well, maybe it wasn't the hunter-gatherers. Maybe it was the ETs who came down. I'm just saying. I don't know. This discovery provides evidence for a significant Mesolithic human activity in the Sicilian Channel region. Several factors lead them to believe the monolith or stone column was cut by humans and was not shaped by nature. They write that the monolith has a regular shape and 3 regular holes of similar diameter. It is composed of limestone of a nature similar to rocks not far away from where it was transported, but it differs from the rocks in the immediate vicinity. Again, it's another monolithic stone that was transported a great distance, and it was cut and carved to precision that is, difficult to do today, and they cannot figure it out. Who were the ones who had that technology? The presence of the monolith suggests extensive human activity in the area. It was cut and entracted as a single stone from the outer rectilinear ridge situated about 300 millimeters, which is 984 feet, to the south. And then it was transported and possibly erected. Well, hey, if it was cut to such precision and transported 984 feet, I'm sure they had the capacity to erect it. From the size of the monolith, we may presume that it weighs about 15 tons. They did not speculate about the function of the monolith, but they assume it was in an important area, which is about halfway between Sicily and Tunisia. Sicily was inhabited possibly between 17,000 and 27,000 years ago, when there was a land bridge from the Italian mainland. The discovery of the submerged site in the Sicilian Channel may significantly expand our knowledge of the earliest civilizations in the Mediterranean basin, and our views on technological innovation and development achieved by the Mesolithic inhabitants. The authors wrote about the monolith made of a single large block required cutting, extraction, transportation, and installation, which undoubtedly reveals important technical skills and great engineering. And I'm going to step in here, and this reminds me of when I went to Easter Island and the monolithic statues there, the Mayor. It's the same thing. They were made of a single large block cut from the volcano there in one part of the island. Amazingly precision cutting. They were extracted from that mountainside. They were transported to all places on the island, and they were installed upright on altar areas. And while I was there, I was reading a brochure. Of course, you know, they have to tell the tourists all about this and what they know. The scientific mind, they were trying to figure out, well, their theories, I guess you'd say. Well, their theories of how the ancient people transported these monolithic structures, statues, was that, you know, they couldn't use trees to roll them on because they had actually eliminated all of their trees. It was a treeless island by then. And the way they did it? Sweet potatoes. They were a culture that used a lot of sweet potatoes. And, you know, when you mash up sweet potatoes, and it can get pretty slippery. So I'm not joking. This was in a brochure. The authorities, those in the know, suggested that this would be a way that they could push those monolithic stone structures along on sweet potatoes. That's so they can't just wrap their mind around or even bridge this difficult point of letting go and saying, you know, there had to have been some ancient power that these people had, you know, using frequency, for instance, to levitate stones. Where did that come from? Where did that information come from then? Well, then they'd have to go further and say, well, where would they have acquired this knowledge of using frequency to levitate things? Well, who gave them that? So, and that's factual. They had done that in of course, and I'll just say it, the myths of ancient people talked about levitating. But again, I don't think it's myths. They did not speculate about the function of these monoliths, right? So the researchers even went so far as to state the belief that our ancestors lacked the knowledge, the skill, and the technology to exploit marine resources or make sea crossings must be progressively abandoned. Hello? The recent findings have definitively removed the idea of technological primitivism, often attributed to hunter-gatherers, coastal settlers. Yeah, I'd say it's time to progressively abandon. Definitely. Hey, the Bermuda Triangle, you know, that's situated between Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, has long been known as a region where many ships and planes have just vanished. And one of the eeriest, unexplainable disappearances was of Flight 19. It was a training mission involving 5 torpedo bombers. The planes left Fort Lauderdale on December 5th, 1945, on routine training, and they never came back. To make it creepier, the search plane dispatched also vanished. The Bermuda Triangle, also known as the Devil's Triangle, is a region of the northwestern Atlantic Ocean in which a number of aircraft and surface vessels have disappeared. Some people have claimed that these disappearances fall beyond the boundaries of human error or acts of nature, and some of these disappearances have been attributed to the paranormal. You think? A suspension of the laws of physics, yes, or activity by extraterrestrial beings. Well, you know, there's a piece there, extraterrestrial beings. After all, listen, this was 1945. December 5th of 1945, Now we have the bomb, Nagasaki and Hiroshima bomb, that alerted the ETs, didn't it? And we also know by a lot of researchers and a lot of, people who are coming forward in the military who are speaking about the seeing UFOs and their nuclear weapons, being shut down by ships. So, I don't know, maybe you have this plane here, Flight 19, although they say it was a training mission. Do you believe that? I have to question everything. Okay? A training mission involving 5 torpedo bombers. Why would they send up 5 torpedo bombers as a training mission? I don't know. I'm just saying, so maybe some of these ETs were alerted and said, hey, not on our turf. Though, a substantial documentation exists showing numerous incidents to have been inaccurately reported or embellished by authors, and numerous official agencies have gone on record as stating the number and nature of disappearances to be similar. It's just nothing. It's just similar to any other area of the ocean, so it's no big deal, folks. That's what they're saying. Is the Bermuda Triangle really dangerous? A vaguely defined expanse of the Atlantic Ocean triangulated between Puerto Rico, Florida, Bermuda has enjoyed a rather sinister, though perhaps largely unearned, reputation for decades. What exactly happened to those planes in 1945, a squadron of 5 U.S. Navy aircraft? What happened to them and to the ships and the aircraft that supposedly went missing in the triangle since then? It's a matter of speculation, with popular theories that run the gamut, of course, from supernatural to science fiction. Norwegian scientists unintentionally provide fuel for a fringe theory on the Bermuda Triangle. And this is in Ancient Origins, March 2016. Scientists in Norway are making waves with an announcement this week that has unintentionally linked giant craters in the Barents Sea to the controversial Bermuda Triangle. They say that the craters could have been created by exploding natural gas, which some say has the possibility of being dangerous for ships. And the international media has run rampant with the idea and connected it to the fringe theory explaining I was going to say it. I guess I will. Mansplaining. I'm going to say mansplaining the odd occurrences in the Bermuda Triangle. Gas craters off Norway linked to fringe Bermuda Triangle theory. I'm just saying mansplaining because it's like the explaining. It's usually done by scientists, and the majority of scientists are male, and I'm not being disrespectful. That is now in our dictionary, mansplaining. So, synchronized probes explore Bermuda Triangle swirling vortices. Some might say the University of Washington oceanographers did well to only lose one of 21 underwater probes, given that they were deployed near the notorious Bermuda Triangle, where boats and airplanes have been known to disappear without a trace. The scientists chose the location to research its swirling whirlpools via a pioneering experiment that repeatedly sent the probes deep into the ocean and back to the surface in unison. The Bermuda Triangle is infamous for making everything from cargo ships to airplanes disappear. It's just been swallowing vessels and is blamed for the loss of hundreds of lives. And here we recap its strangest disappearance. This is in 1492. Okay. The 1492 light sighting was a sighting of unknown light during the first voyage of Christopher Columbus. Oh, I remember that. I mean, not that I was there. I mean, I remember reading this. On October 11th, 1492. There was an unknown light sighted by some crew members of Santa Maria, Pinta, and possibly Nina, shortly before the landing on Guanahani. The light was reported in Columbus's journal, Ferdinand Columbus' Vita del Ammiraglio. It's called The Life of the Admiral, the proceedings of the Pleitos Colombinos, the long lawsuit involving the heirs of Columbus and some other sources. Columbus described the light as, characterized it as a candle that went up and down. Up and down. Okay, let me read more here for you. Okay, 1492 light sighting was a sighting of unknown light during the first voyage of Christopher Columbus in 1492. So he says, the event wrote about it in his abstract log. And a sailor named Reggio di Triana saw this land first, although the admiral of the 10th hour of the night, while he was on the stern castle, saw a light, although it was something so faint that he did not wish to affirm that it was land. But he called Pero Gutierrez, the steward of the king's dais, and told him that there seemed to be a light, and for him to look, and thus he did, and he saw. It was calculated that the 12 leagues that the crew ran since 10 p.m. with the 2 leagues distance of the land essentially correspond to the distance and location of Walting's Island from Guanahani. So, as such, it was presumed that the light was on Watling's Island, which was passed by Columbus already, judging by the speed of the ships provided by Naval Journal. An early explanation was offered by Bartolomeo de las Casas, who wrote, I feel about this is that the Indians at night throughout these islands, as they are temperate without any cold, go out and used to go out from their straw houses that they call bohíos at night to comply with their natural necessities, and take it in hand a firebrand or a small torch. It has been proposed that the light was caused by bioluminescent protozoa. I'm going to say that again. The light was caused by bioluminescent protozoa. I'm going to use that when people say they see a UFO, instead of swamp gas or ultralights flying in formation. No, it was bioluminescent protozoa. However, this theory is rendered improbable due to the small wax candle nature of the light, which suggests a point source. A single female Bermuda fireworm, which is called Odonostilis enopia, may have separate short periods of excessive and minor brilliance. So now what they saw was a fireworm that has short periods of excessive and minor brilliance, perhaps accounting for a candlelight display. But later research has shown that the activity is confined to only a few days past the full moon, so that ruled that out. But I remember reading about this. They're not really describing it so sensationally here, because it was a light that went up quite a distance, rose up above the waters, and then came down again, and so on and so forth. So that's, there's Columbus on his Santa Maria Pinta and Nina, or the people there, and they're seeing this. What do you think it was? Was it a UFO? Or swamp gas? Just saying. Okay. Oh, by the way, I'm going to take a short break, but you know what? I'm looking at the triangle area. It is a triangle area here. The Bermuda Triangle, Miami, Florida, Bermuda, and San Juan, Puerto Rico makes a distinct shape of one of the triangle UFO ships. It is exactly like it. I'm looking at it right here in front of me. It's quite amazing. And I'm going to pop this information to you on the chat. I'm going to take a short break, and then I'll get back, and I think I'm going to continue with the alien mind and see what those Verdants are up to. Okay, I'll see you on the other side.
All righty, are we back?
The thinking alien mind, and we moved into the hyperversals. Verdants are one group, which are the colonizers, who are very nice ETs, and those are the ones that I'm more and more understanding are really working to infiltrate into certain people here on Earth, and I think we could probably identify numbers of them, okay? We could call them the elite or the cabal, because I always say, well, who is really behind this? You know, we say, well, there's the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, yeah, but who is really behind this whole cabal, the whole of the elite? What's the source of it to get these people into this, I guess you'd say, evil frame of mind? So, now the hyperversals are another ET group, and the notion of species might stretch the human idea of possibilities. This is what we're looking at here. One hyperversal ET says that hyperversals tend to be non-sexual, which if true would be encouraging. Imagine what the universe would be like over time if they were all sexuals, meaning, but the universe is so vast. I don't know why they're worried. I assume, as appears to be the case, that at present hyperversals may be more modest in number than more recently evolved populations. There seems to be a theme here, part of a theme, I suppose, about the sexual or non-sexual, I guess you'd say, persons, human as well as ETs. And why I'm adding humans in here is because of what's happening here on Earth. There is a discussion about the Georgia Guidestones, about a certain amount of people needing to keep the population at a certain amount. Okay, that's one piece. Then you have something going on with fertility here. There's a lot of, research going on about what's happening to the fertility levels of women and of men. So you have something going on here, which of course I think relates to a lot of the pollution. We could even say chemtrails. We could say fluoride in the water, the pharmaceuticals. We could just name numerous things that something's going on. Now, is it deliberate? I don't know. There's hybridization, there's genetic manipulation. We have all this stuff going on, and now this pops up here that I've been reading for a while about the sexual ETs or non-sexual ETs and what's happening out there in the other realms and in the other planets and for when they overpopulate. And also this piece, which I thought was very fascinating. It seems in this conversation that I'm reading that it is realized that non-sexual beings are more spiritually aligned or more spiritually aware, let's say. And when you're a sexual being, you're more working, I guess you'd say, more likely to be in the zone of overstimulated or distracted. I'm going to use that word, distracted, and there is a lot of distraction going on too. Let's throw in the rise of really increasing pornography, pedophilia. We have all these things going on, which is to me a huge distraction, but a distraction from what? It's a distraction from morals. It's a distraction from responsibility. And you could throw in there in a spiritual balance or harmony. Okay, so this is what we're looking at here now, talking here. So hyperversals are far more capable if in their evolved populations. The problem with estimating hyperversal population numbers is that our notion of time is definitely not the limit elsewhere. Even though we're beginning to understand the nature of time and hyperspace, overall, there may be more hyperversals than recently evolved aliens. When hyperversals can both see and ascertain that you understand their terms of existence, the basic universal assumptions of their lives, they are more sympathetic to you, especially if you live by similar standards. In other words, they go out of their way to emphasize that the entire universe continuously strives to return to or integrate as a unified collective entity, its true basis, which is sometimes distorted by pretension and misconcept. And I like this because I think this is really important to know that This is the terms of their existence, all right? The terms of these hyperversals' existence is they go out of their way to emphasize that the entire universe. So this is the entire universe. We're part of that. But where are we lost to it, or what? That the entire universe continuously strives, or let's say should be striving, to return to or integrate as a unified collective entity, which is its true basis. And I kind of tend to agree with that. Okay. Now, it's all part of a very large drama involving numerous galaxy groups. One hyperversal showed where Verdants have lightly fingered into at least 6 galaxy groups, 5 surrounding groups, plus our Andromeda M33 Milky Way group. Given that we all wrap into the Virgo supercluster, we must coexist with our neighbors, but should do so on mutually more evolved terms. Meanwhile, hyperversals exchange information on a universal scale. In comparison, Verdants are small scale, strange as that may sound to some. But at intervals we hear limited mention about events deep within Virgo and interactions between superclusters. At one point, a hyperversal ET said that the boy in the bubble, X3, who I and others communicated with telepathically, is like I am in comparison to all of humanity, which is advanced in some ways, but not broadly representative of the aggregate, in other words. At another time, a hyperversal said the human image of X3 only goes about as far as Aunt B of Andy of Mayberry does in comparison to the rest of the United States. Yes, those were the words they used. It was probably reference to the fact that X3, which by the way is an ET, is a prototypical dependent of the 3 ellipticals subgroup, which appears to be tasked with monitoring and interacting with Verdants and the IFSP. We're talking about different types of ETs here. It helps to imagine how it might be for an entirely different advanced species to look down on strange hairheads, as one hyperversal humorously suggested that we might be seen at a glance, so they're calling us humans hairheads. For an alien who has lived thousands, if not millions of years, the current human generation may seem transitory and uncertain. Past human history was a sordid, often bloody parade of self-serving primitives who took often too much while claiming to do so little in the name of God, although rarely, if ever, allowing fair and free discussion about the nature of God and the universe. And even now, our government tries to deny that intelligent life does exist on other worlds. When will we grow up? That was me piping in there, as you probably can imagine. My hyperversal control freaks to under in and start to manipulate it helps to remember that any and all individuals in the universe are capable of error. I sometimes note one error in particular, actually a bundling of errors. It has to do with the fact that the entire universe is only definitive singular quantity. It can't be observed as a whole, but can only be modeled as a relatively faint and subtle near whole. When a given regime or group of manipulators peers out at all the rest, they sometimes make the mistake of assuming that they definitively encompass the entire universe. When other competing structures do the same, we see a fairly simple but dangerous irony. The one group's structured observation is distorted and amplified by the second group's structured observation. In other words, it's the mathematical equivalent of structure times structure, which is error-prone. Rather than divide their observations into a larger commonality, they multiply their error instead. So, therefore, we see too many whole-numbered misconceptions and not enough humility. When a limited group of hyperversal ETs manipulators tries to lord it over a large variety of other distorted structures, the result is cold and cruel and even destructive. And even among the best aliens, there are structural distortions, but in corrupt and materialistic alien interactions, distortions are worse. When Verdants and their cohorts to usher in disastrously overpopulated and aggressive, if not destructive, of entire planets, we humans must step back and study this phenomenon carefully and not succumb to the bully temptation to leap in and trade away human sovereignty, nearby planets, and even more, especially when this galaxy needs to reduce population because it will merge in the future. There it is again, folks. So, this is important. A warning, I guess you could say, is for us humans, step back to study the phenomenon carefully and not succumb to the bully temptation to leap in and trade away human sovereignty, which is, we're being picked away at, as you can surmise, easy to see really, our human sovereignty, our sovereign rights, which I like to bring in there that says we are sovereign spiritual beings. We have a right really to our own spiritual connectedness. We are spirit beings anyway, but Creator gave us that right. We are sovereign human beings and a spirit within us. And let's not give away our nearby planets either. And because in the future, the galaxies, keep saying here, the galaxies need to reduce population because we will be merging in the future. It's far beyond. Instead, we need to remember that part of the human elite, remember, the elite cabal is corrupt and ready to waste the lives of billions. They've already been doing that with all the wars that they keep pushing on us, to squander the planet's ecology. They're working on that too, in exchange for a parrot's perch on some puny IFSP starship. And that's what it is. That's why it's so easy to disregard the planet's ecology and our resources here, because these corrupt elite and cabal have been promised the parrot's perch on some puny IFSP starship. Oh, they've sold their soul to the devil, so they don't care. Their first strategy is to say we can cut a deal with the IFSP. Then, in fact, they already have. Guess what? They have. A tiny human elite will say certain technologies can be ours if we just play along, even though the deal is bought with the blood of innocents and funded through narcotics trafficking by government shadow agencies. To survive decently, we can't wait for the worst to happen. We just cannot. Instead, we must act on a global scale, not merely in one nation. Change of the sort cannot be bought in a store or made solely on the Internet. Alien math and science show that the most intelligent and enduring choices are finer and more subtle, hence more universally capable and sustaining. We don't need to withdraw from all alien interactions, but we need to raise public awareness of aliens before we become a kind of IFSP slave market. When the majority says no, we won't let an offending minority destroy our planet. We won't play along with the IFSP's infantile Earth changes strategy. The old regime will grind to a halt. Some IFSP operatives will try to escape, but for now, they want to squelch all news of their crimes and silence public figures who actually can expose them at any moment. And to survive, we, humans, must take risks and reach a wider audience. This isn't a time to hide from reality and merely pamper one's own small family. At times, Verdant-related hyperversals try to slow my teaching of basic hyperdynamics to other humans. They try to change the topic when I point out hyperversals' modes and concepts. Their diversions have various motives. Some hyperversals think the wrong humans may learn too much, while others want to obscure their own misguided doings. Their diversions tend to be abrupt and coarse and involve offenders who seem to be bundled into Verdant, manipulated terroricides, and more. And to some readers, this may seem a cold slap in the face, but it's a fact of life. The politics of the 21st century feature a variety of alien populations. You know that, right? I know we all know that. Listeners, you listeners out there on Wolf Spirit Radio, Aggie Shack Radio, you all know this. I'm sure you know this. The politics of the 21st century feature a variety of alien populations. They're already here, so it's better to investigate them than be deceived. And taken as a whole, hyperversals have tried to evolve beyond low-order animal impulses, but nonetheless, some of the following may discomfort people who shy away from investigative reporting. Perhaps it's best to say what's about to be said in terms of a two or more sided analogy. So on one hand, in order to escape being caught within that hell-like event horizon of destroyers and extreme violators, we need to be more honest. We need to be more studied, more humble and sensitive. And on the other hand, it's nice to know that if we persevere and we help regenerate a more gently abiding universe, that we can be part of a larger, hyper-intelligent community. The physics of the universe allow for shared thought, although the worst among us try to deny the fact. Mass destruction is a dead end that mass offenders pretend not to notice. Meanwhile, a better way is ever regenerated, yet takes commitment and effort. No one in the universe is immune in that regard. You won't be accepted and integrated into greater orders of mind if you don't behave accordingly. You simply won't be a match. Hyperspace can be ordered in terms of such distinctions within certain limitations. Are hyperversals preemptive behaviors intended to avert reckless newcomers before they can do too much damage? Does a larger universal convention already exist regarding such offenders? In other words, are Verdants a small-scale balance of powers pawn, or are they population offenders being steered toward confrontations that may help to moderate Verdant wastefulness? And as is usually the case, truth lies in both scenarios. At times, the three ellipticals subculture tends toward nightmarish extremes of cocoon-like, obliterative propaganda. At some times, they tend to rationalize Verdant crimes at every turn and try to fill up the mind space of observing humans with distractions and diversions. Such diversions are dense and impulsive, sometimes infantile. Ironically, three elliptical ET hyperversals cut themselves off from larger alternatives by doing so. They could be a fateful irony of the fact that propaganda has triumphed over critique, plus the fact that those hyperversals had a history of exploitation. It's as though the original specious impulse that caused both the three elliptical ET factions and Verdants to take too much has never been entirely corrected. However, hyperversals do think and listen. They have to see further than the Verdants, I'm pretty sure. We've seen one or two three elliptical aliens give orders to X3s, much like Verdants do with Greys. Such conspicuous display of rank suggests insecurity or unresolved conflict and the possibility of larger supercluster questions about their approach to newly evolved aliens. In short, the hyperversal that I call X3 may have no independent historical origin. He appears to be a hybrid designed to attend to Verdant gray-human interactions. Meanwhile, the survival of life on Earth hangs in the balance, in part due to the IFSP's crude intervention, because millions have died as a result of IFSP operative schemes. Just see the history that is noted above. The tendency of IFSP strategies is to act as though the death of human innocence makes IFSP manipulators of such deaths holy in some strange way. We see this kind of crap in human politics also. Speaking more generally, one hyperversal made the following caricatured comment. At a juncture where hyperversal policy was in question, he showed a large expanse of space in the middle of which was a huge, soft, blue-gray orb space. That was a hyperversal community that dominated the entire scene. Over time, we've observed Vedants defer to three ellipticals hyperversals smoothly cognizant in their existence. In fact, when pressured and criticized regarding IFSP direct operatives' crimes against humanity, one Verdant impulsively blurted out that the Verdant strategy had been cleared with a hyperversal population. Ironically, as is noted in the later chapter, there's evidence that three elliptical hyperversals directly contributed to the Verdant's genetic development. Verdants may in part have smoothed the way for their own expansion by doing three things: by offering biological and other materials in trade with one or a few local groups of hyperversals, and agreeing to configure their energy networks in a way that's compatible with hyperversals, and then also promising to change some sexual populations to non-sexuals. The fact that hyperversals reportedly centered Verdants to Earth's location suggests that there's a trading and a technology interaction between them. We can assume that three elliptical hyperversals need large quantities of resources, which can't be reaped from empty space. They need diverse genetic and manufactured materials, plus minerals. Given that Verdants have the most opportunistic, hence easily manipulated regime in the fringe of Virgo, three ellipticals hyperversals likely trade with them on some scale. In other words, the worst, but not all hyperversals may think Verdants can be used to essentially steal time from, if not eliminate, some newly evolved populations. That stealing time as it relates to the evolved aliens. One advanced hyperversal suggested that Bearden's a change of time caused by electrogravity is really a kind of alternate T or alt-T, but it's a larger sense. It apparently involves greater and hopefully finer categories of gravitic energy convergence. Sometimes it seems as though a basic test of hyper-advanced aliens' competency is their simple vulnerability. And rather than generalize about hyperversals, I should note that callous hyperversals may represent the lowest of their kind, those whose impulses tend to be bunched ever so singularly into the nearest spacious scheme like that of the Verdants. Ultimately, humans need to be concerned about some egalitarian societies that cut themselves off from others in the universe. Some equalitarian societies live in relative luxury, although on fairly equal terms, unlike humankind's rich versus poor scheme at present. The question from our perspective is, what is the threat? To whom? One of the most bluntly spoken hyperversals has stated that there is no legal order to rely on. His drift was that humans must conform within a hierarchical kind of scheme, or perhaps perish. Meanwhile, there's a precisely defined, if not mathematical, order of being in all that happens. It's like a Tao-like consequences, albeit more active in character than is the traditional Taoist outlook. It's inconceivable that hyperversal societies don't have carefully evolved legal structures, although some may assert that humans haven't signed legitimate treaties with off-world governments. Ironically, humans who fawningly accept IFSP dogma, they don't hear a word about hyper-advanced aliens. Instead, what they do hear are infantile remarks about angels and invisible others instead. And why do IFSP aliens omit mentioning the hyperversals anyway? Apparently, it's because some Verdants want to play God and take the lion's share of whatever they can get. For Verdants, primarily. And one Verdant tried to convince Philip Kraft that Verdants are the only superpower, when instead they aren't even remotely like such an entity. The greater order of being isn't about power and control, but interacts on more evolved mutual terms irrespective of technological prowess. Absence of sexuality among some hyperversals has made them more civilized and capable, but I've noticed that some will dunder into a place and, whether wittingly or not, play to an epic sense of grandeur. In other words, they can sit and watch humans die by the millions and pass due to IFSB manipulations, and meanwhile, hyperversals openly explain what's going on, even though we can't adequately compete with IFSP goons when our public remains uninformed. Our government hijacked by cabal elements who, whether they know it or not, are working to divide and corrupt humankind to the IFSP's advantage. Watching from a distance, an old and detached yet supposedly healthy hyperversal can observe, adding his or her own expansive sense of drama to it all, while our planet Earth gets trashed by a criminal regime that cuts secret deals with the ETs. One hyperversal remarked that such a situation can drive a planet to death, a people to slave-like desperation, and in the end, life has simply been extinguished. Ironically, potential problems for hyperversals will have been eliminated. Ours wouldn't be the first planet ruined by a misguided intervention. Humans are getting a preliminary look at a kind of Munchausen syndrome among aliens, yet few such aliens will admit to it. Instead, they glibly suggest that we could eliminate the evil gene or engineer our sexuality out in order to get along better. Meanwhile, if government whistleblowers are correct, a corrupt human cabal has been introduced to the genetic tools needed to do so, but they work in secret to secure themselves rather than help humankind. Were human science to develop an enzyme that extends human life, big corporations would say no, they couldn't market such a thing because it would force them to pay pensions for years beyond what they've planned. So, as ghastly as it may sound, progress of the sort is unlikely under the current regime. It denies that aliens exist, yet does secret deals with them. It uses men like David Rockefeller's brother, Lawrence, to trivialize public concern by making minor token references to unidentified flying objects or UFOs, when they know very well that many alien craft have been fully identified for years. We could try to paint a happy face on our ex-political, off-world political dilemma, as one hyperversal suggested we do, but that would be irresponsible, wouldn't it? Hyperversals need to hear critiques. Hyperversal aliens exist and they are fallible. We can treat them as though they don't have coldly detached age-related limitations. There are offenders in some of their security and policy sections who have technology for which they alone could never be responsible. Meanwhile, Verdants move in on other galaxies and take advantage of vulnerable populations. We can see the hypocrisy in all of this. Verdants are the worst population offenders we've encountered to date. They sneak in, they sneak trade with or control of vulnerable populations. They run the clock on other galaxies and hope that hyperversals will see them as a vulgar but necessary mixer, forcing galaxies to interact. Meanwhile, by their own admission to craft, Verdants are intellectually marginalized sexuals who change sex mates every few decades, out of boredom. Sounds like what's going on here on Earth. They use epic amounts of energy and they take more for themselves than any other population along the small fringe of Virgo. Now, is this good ecology? Etched into my memory is one morning more than a year after first learning about hyperversals, when there were a series of callous remarks by a seemingly hybrid intermediary alien whose energy network and associations suggest that he may either work with or be cognizant of an older, pre-existing generation of hyperversals who make certain discrete appearances in ways that do suggest more advanced capabilities. The seeming hybrid, coldly and distantly said sexuals can be so dangerous that the death of some potentially dangerous sexuals planets are unavoidable. He repeated such remarks as though oblivious to the fact that humans are endangered by the IFSP's aggressive manipulations. It was as though we were allowed no time to educate our people before the IFSP does too much damage. The old hardliner has made a variety of remarks. Some are encouraging, but others are coldly distant and very Orwellian. Distressed by this predicament, I couldn't help thinking that humans live in a remote location that may best be described by way of analogy. If the visible universe were but our one single planet, we would live in a tiny hamlet called Earth, hiding in the shadow of a potential volcano, our future merged elliptical galaxy, adjoining a tiny remote island, which would be the Milky Way. That's part of a group of islands and situated somewhere near a valley of cities, the Virgo supercluster. Some hyperversals who attend to our situation may be like a floating consulate in a large craft far out in the ocean. They may try to perform their responsibilities according to a certain plan. But in this analogy, Verdance would be a single tribe living in a number of villages on a few tiny islands far from larger population centers. The greater population centers of the universe may not hear much about our distant, relatively small predicament here on Earth. They have other crises to attend to. In terms of the analogy above, the death of the gray planet would, like Nauru, a small, forested South Pacific island that was mined and deleted by foreign companies that left the island a treeless, deserted wasteland. And meanwhile, the gray planet isn't merely ruined, it's completely, irrevocably dead. And the grays have been removed to work on what, by way of analogy, is yet another island in a tacky little casino that fancies itself economically important. In other words, humans should be aware that the Verdants may try to play up to more advanced hyperversals by posing an implicit deal. They would do grotesque, dirty work, yet they would stay in touch. The Verdants will also help kill off some dangerous new populations, and they will help avert the risk that aliens in the vicinity will interact with each other independent of hyperversal inputs. Meanwhile, if so meager yet quick a learner as myself and those in communication with me can see through such a scheme at this early date, thanks to persistent coaching from native aliens and hyperversals put off by Verdants, then the Verdant scheme to buddy up to hyperversals may be in trouble. Ironically, Verdant expansion probably causes competing non-IFSP aliens to interact more tightly together. And rather than avert alien interactions outside of the Verdant network, Verdant excess will cause a larger counter-convention to cohere. Now, here's an unexpected irony. We, as a newly evolved people, humans, need to remember that hyperversals can be highly civilized. They seem to be sensitive to human suffering, and due to their relatively insular remove from people like us, some hyperversals can sometimes seem like the former children of gentle, trusting societies. They're categorically more civilized than the Verdants, though, and they have a greater, finer kind of insight, which can be enormously helpful. But nonetheless, Verdants seem to have found a way to manipulate hyper-advanced aliens' vulnerabilities. To appreciate how that might be done, you need to see the full galactic outlines of Verdant expansion. They have many planets, their vast rake of resources, and their desire to travel and sexually indulge beneath the light of billions of distant stars. Verdants pose the full scale of their empire, direct use of energy on a galaxy scale, their mining of resources in smaller surrounding galaxies, and their experiments with the genes of any aliens that they can get their hands on in order to take maximum advantage of hyperversal aliens. They don't ask for permission to do so. Meanwhile, the most advanced hyperversals are the non-sexuals. neither as brutal and predatory nor as territorial as the Verdants. The difference between non-sexuals and sexuals is one of the defining themes of life in this universe. Some hyperversals have moderated their numbers, certainly their primitive impulses. They live within community, communities of mind, a much more advanced social premise. And meanwhile, Verdants aren't yet a community of mind, but by any stretch. They don't even treat others as equals. Verdants have found a way to twist and manipulate some hyperversals. Verdants are like spoiled children. They've learned to traumatize lesser populations. Verdant spokespersons say that, but a transcendental irony of their larger cosmic responsibilities, Verdants use target populations, resources, and pepper surrounding star systems with small, token, surrogate populations. Some of the worst hyperversals do material deals with Verdants, and hyperversals certainly monitor and they influence the extent of which hyperversals and other known aliens use gravitic energy. Earth's environment. Verdants will try to make humans into non-sexuals via the Verdant breeding program. There you go. All right, here's the piece I've been looking for. Verdants will try to make humans into non-sexuals via the Verdant breeding program. And the Verdants argue that the degradation or death of planet Earth will have been worth it. I've witnessed such argument at various junctures, and Verdants occasionally boast that they physically dominate at least one large galaxy because they've attended to a variety of alien populations. Okay. In large-scale interactions between aliens, the errors of any one population either stimulate or a larger corrective response or a failure among the given populations. Hyper-advanced alien behavior. Meanwhile, psychological casualties of the sort can find refuge within the vacant shell mentality among certain sectors of offending megapopulations. One hyperversal responded to the above by saying that my exposition of the sort could antagonize certain regime-minded hyperversals who tend to Verdants. So there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, up in the cosmic realm, I guess you'd say, vying for resources, not only Earth, but other planets, and that there are numerous ETs working on this, a most singular limitation. So there are three ellipticals factions. There are the hyperversals and the Verdants. And so to illustrate how a person skilled in remote viewing can actually view a regime trapped behind an event horizon, consider the Verdants. This is about remote viewing. Offending Verdants appear to think that their version of community mind centers on a black hole kind of singularity, which they manage to exceed through the basic easy resonance of hyperspace. How do their thoughts and telepathic psychotronic interactions center on a singularity? When a population like Verdants uses energy on a large scale, they must carefully monitor the ecology of the matter versus singularity equilibrium in their galaxy. Their use of electrogravity and negative energy isn't free. Instead, it can upset the basic equilibrium and speed the clock on a galaxy's energy lifetime. But Verdants know that, which is why they seek to use great amounts of energy elsewhere. Verdants are a galaxy-spanning population that uses psychotronic and faster-than-light communications technology, and in order to do so, they must configure it all in relation to their galaxy's central black hole, and ultimately in relation to other galaxies. In order to communicate and interact with each other, they seek maximum range and scope in their galaxy, which fluctuates in relation to their galaxy's central black hole. For more advanced aliens, Such relationships are a given and aren't so much of a problem at this stage in our universe cycle. But the equilibrium of the Verdance home galaxy has been overly depleted. They simply take too much. They aren't modest enough to proportion themselves according to equal consideration. Such thinking, coupled with the arrogations of empire, isn't characteristic of the finest minds. There are great scale checks on offenders like some Verdants. Meanwhile, like the basic physics of the universe, finer minds course more largely. Basic negative energy dynamics allow Verdant thought to dimensional through the nearest singularity faster than light. But this is a critical but. Their empire's central authority subtly stifles thought and doesn't allow adequate dissent. It's as though by exceeding their ability to sustain themselves, by going out to dominate and control other worlds, by taking too much and killing some relatively innocent planets in the process, they lapse into a lower order of mind. Although they don't discern it as such, that's the ultimate trap. The ultimate failing within such arrogance, as is true with all severe offenders, the first step into wrongdoing drops them into a lower order of more singular consciousness, not a higher community of mind, not a higher consciousness, which is multiply interdimensional. Instead, they tend to lapse into the sum total of their neighborhood's all of time offenders. I like this, the fact that, yes, it makes sense to me that the wrongdoers, the offenders, the violence against and murder of, basically lowers them or brings them down into a lower order of mind. They don't recognize that, they don't discern it as that, but it is a lower order of mind, not a higher consciousness, lower consciousness. Power and domain are hypnotic diversions for some. They revel in the awe of a galactic scale, singular darkness, a kind of hypersphere where but ugly arrogations tend to rule. Male Verdants seek sexual opportunity amid such diversions, and the crueler and more psychically unattractive they are, the more spectacular and destructive the dance. And some may coldly sacrifice. Their community mind is not a community mind. When a person skilled in remote sensing encounters and then studies offending Verdants and offending hyperversals, you have to understand that you, that person, must remotely inflate beyond their physical bounds, fluctuating through and beyond their limitations. And that's what happens when you are remote viewing. You are moving beyond the boundaries of your physical limitations. And then and only then do you literally see them hovering ever so slightly above a kind of event horizon. That's when you're able to view these ETs. When you look back from a kind of double distance, what you see and what they don't see is that the preponderance of such offenders' assumptions are trapped within a singular condition, but not being implicated, may exist beyond that. And you, the viewer, may be more universally acceptable, hence capable of inclusion within a higher order of mind. When you study offending aliens of this sort, you see that their minds and their interactions are limited to a kind of dark state. So that's, again, an energy and a frequency. So when you study an offending alien, for instance, or when you may study a person or a so-called human, which might be a hybrid, you would see that their minds and interactions are limited to a kind of dark state. But you would also see and sense a darkness or a different energy, we would say. When what you see is that their thoughts are too darkly bunched up when compared to finer, more active minds in hyperspace, And with experience over time, a good, thoughtful person sees a good person who is working for the good or working in the light, or we should say, or could say like the light workers. A thoughtful person sees very clearly. Offending alien networks of the sort are trapped in a dark kind of subcondition in hyperspace. Although they might say that's simply an irony of security, they believe that, and the harsh realities of power and control. But ironically, if you simply feel around in the nature around you, is a categorically more detailed pattern of slightly dark fluctuations, finely threaded into a greater kind of light, both in and through hyperspace, in much more detail, which you can essentially see and feel into when you expand your awareness. And this is just, I guess he's just describing here for remote viewers, meaning if he's saying if you simply feel around, so it's not like feeling with your hands like, oh, where is it? It's like energy-wise, feeling, sensing. I'll use that term, sensing, the nature around you. If you sense the nature around you, you will experience a more detailed pattern of slightly dark fluctuations. Okay, so if you're near a person or ET or walk-in or whatever you want to call them, you would sense a detailed pattern of slightly dark fluctuations. They're finely threaded. Well, this energy that he's talking about, it's frequency here. And you would feel that. And of course, he's also including here, it's through hyperspace. It's the kind of light that is both in and through hyperspace. And you can essentially see, actually visualize and feel, sense this when you expand your awareness. And again, that's awareness of all your sensory abilities. It's an artifact of the most advanced, most inclusive and comprehensive potential in the universe, and it's available to all good minds. So the most hopeful, promising experience is right in your own backyard, and it's all around us, everywhere you can go. Better yet, a good deeds only mind can see extra categories of such detail, even extra horizons that if you define yourself in such terms, you can actually merge with and be a part of. Meanwhile, alien offenders revel in a sense of power and singular pretension, yet remain trapped within a realm that includes other ghastly offenders. So there's different variations here. There's different realms, which makes sense to me. When you say a light realm or a realm that is aligned with the light or divinity or goodness or harmony and balance, it feels different. It makes sense. It feels entirely different. Or if you're focusing on the other realm, which is a lower frequency, it would feel differently. It would be dark. It would be heavy. It would be burdensome. It would feel different. It could feel a violating experience, almost shocking or intrusive, uncomfortable. See, like that. So the most hopeful, again, very promising experience is right here in our own backyard. So again, it's very important that we are capable of discerning the dark from the light, or the goodness from the not so good, I guess you'd say. Some readers haven't yet developed the remote viewing connectedness needed to recognize the singular limitations of alien offenders. So, the singular limitations of alien offenders. And there are other aliens that are not offenders, okay? Some are, some aren't. A good person probably has at least an intuitive feel for it, though. And this is perhaps the most important distinction that I can discuss in this book. It separates different orders of being, and it can endure for the living equivalent of all time for you, given that there are extra universe cycles. Woe to those who assume that the seemingly singular physical pretensions of the latest cycle are all they need to worry about. The higher, finer, and more far-reaching, more comprehensive dimensions of mind are reserved for either older, more educated and humble civilizations or finer, good deed-only minds. And most good, non-greedy, non-killer, non-offending humans can skip through and beyond offenders' realms. Although you don't even know it. You don't realize it. You can skip through that. It probably only seems real to them when they sleep, when low-order precepts are suspended, however fleetingly. But no person in his or her right mind will jump into the hole with such offenders. It isn't safe to do so, because over time, it can corrupt a person's mind beyond recognition. It isn't so easy to reorder a brutal mind, no matter how good it once was. And there are, nevertheless, they have to live with that. And I guess what I take from this, if I might say, is, as I would say, like in a shaman is trained through generations, through the family. The shaman's way is a training. And they train for years to be able to jump into the hole with offenders. I'm just going to take his sentence here. But he says no person in his or her right mind will jump into the hole with such offenders. But this is what a shaman does, because they have training. And they can deal with the offenders. And they can remove themselves and release themselves, or battle against, or whatever they need to do. Okay, that's why he says, we don't need to do that. If you see someone dark, if you see somebody who doesn't seem right, or an ET, you don't need to engage. You have the light. Call on the light. So, be in that light. Use that power. So, there is a problem with such minds, and I don't pretend that none are salvageable, is that they hive within a double darkness. Although some boast of their light-like qualities, most humans are unacquainted with discussions about repressive communities of mind that mimic more advanced communities and hover just above the event horizon of a galaxy's central black hole. Advanced aliens both know and have seen such phenomenon. So how can mind be dimensioned beyond body? And how can offenders circulate way out there when their mind hive centers on a singularity at the center of the galaxy? So he's describing this sending out your consciousness. Here's how. It's called negative alt, negative/ALT. Cycle, resonance, tightly and discreetly ties all deeper quantum fluctuations. It happens in every quantum and in seemingly empty space. So, it ties all deeper quantum fluctuations to all singularities in any given part of the universe. And that means on a cosmic scale, all negative energy can connect to the universe's sum total of black holes. But let's get real here. Manipulative killers like the IFSP's worst don't rate on a universal scale. They are continuously criticized, and sometimes they are warned. But there seems to be a tacit understanding that better kinds need to maintain a healthy remove from them, from an indistinguishable invisibility the worst IFSP offenders have. A larger order in the universe favors finer-minded, non-violent citizens of decent, evolving societies. So, time isn't a one-way river. Those who think or behave as though they can take too much and are run around in a low-order, one-way circle, in a sense, it's like time isn't a one-way river. So, all right. I'm going to stop there at time isn't a one-way river. I have my own perception on time isn't a one-way river. I kind of agree with that, but we could figure out what that really means, because I believe it's the journey around the great central sacred hoop, returning. But the universe is huge. The galaxies and universes infinite with many beings, and we're all a part of it. And I guess I just leave you with just saying, don't worry, and don't be in fear. Just know there's an amazing opportunity at this timeline where we are. And I feel the opportunity is about our awareness, our enlightenment, our gaining knowledge and wisdom and advancing to higher, let's say just a higher light, a brighter light. This is the age of enlightenment, actually, and the prophecies say. So here we are, and I'm finding this read very interesting and deep. I hope you're enjoying it, and I will see you next Friday. And have a good bye. Thank you.